first interview of the morning. And we are talking Eskom. Now, one of Eskom's biggest service providers is threatening to withdraw services to Eskom due to non-payment. Now, Eskom has warned that South Africa could be facing or will be led and plunged into total darkness if Oracle, which is the company in question, is not stopped from withdrawing its services because of a payment dispute. And Oracle provides a range of technical services to Eskom, which the power utility says are crucial to its operations. But apart from the Oracle debacle, we're asking this morning, what other sort of factors could actually see South Africa plunged into darkness at all? So joining us for this discussion is Eskom spokesperson Sikonathi Mantshantsha, also president of the National Union of Mineworkers, Joseph Montisetse, as well as chairman of resources and investment company Menar is Mpumelelo Mkhabela. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you so much to all of you for joining us.
Good morning, Sakina.
So I'm going to start with you, Sikonathi, by asking just for context with regard to the Oracle debacle and Eskom, the actual dispute. What does it relate to, and what sort of services does Eskom currently rely on Oracle to provide?
Thank you, Sakina, and good morning. The first thing I must do is correct your intro there. You said because of non-payment. It's not non-payment. There is a contractual dispute in which Oracle is claiming that it is owed by Eskom 7.3 billion rands. That was their opening claim. They said Eskom has overused the software and the services that technical support services that Oracle provides. When Eskom disputed the amount, it dropped to 800 million rands, and it further dropped again upon further disputes from Eskom to the current 400 million rands. So Oracle is claiming that it has been underpaid by Eskom to the tune of 400 million rands. Eskom only admits that it owes in total 166 million rands to Oracle, which it will pay as soon as it receives an invoice for that amount. We have indeed, as I have said, Eskom is willing to pay this and has asked or challenged Oracle to take this claim, to appoint a third party, an auditor, to investigate and check the veracity of the claim of now 400 million rands and subject that to that test. Once an amount has been confirmed by a third party, then the parties will both make it an order of court in order to create a legal basis for Eskom to be able to pay whatever might be outstanding at that point.
So what is the amount in dispute at the moment? How much is Oracle saying you have not paid them that you are supposed to pay them as Eskom?
It's the amount in dispute is 220 billion rand because Eskom admits that it owes 166 million rands. Oracle is claiming 380 million rands. Let's repeat, this is not because of non-payment on the part of Eskom. It arises from a dispute about the usage of the license, which Oracle says there has been an overusage of its licenses and services on the part of Eskom.
So the offending statement, I think, over the weekend that got many South Africans thinking is when Eskom admits that this problem could actually lead to South Africa being plunged into darkness. So explain to us the services that Oracle actually provides to Eskom and how that could possibly plunge us into darkness, one, and what is the actual probability, Sikonathi, of that happening?
Amongst others, Oracle provides software on which Eskom relies on to maintain its power stations in the planned maintenance of power stations. We also rely on Oracle's software for services such as online vending for people at home to buy their electricity online. We rely on some of these for distribution of electricity, particularly in areas where people rely on prepaid meters. So there are quite a lot of services. Those are just the few that I have mentioned. And Eskom has now put in contingency measures to eliminate or to significantly reduce any risk arising from Oracle unilaterally pulling out of its obligations. Oracle has a contract with Eskom, a binding contract, all the way ending in March 2022. And should they pull out, indeed, Eskom has got teams that can take over. That Oracle complements already. So we rely on them to add to our internal teams, and these have been brought up to speed in order to be able to withstand or fill the void that might be left in the absence of Oracle's technical experts.
So what is the actual risk to South Africans? Hence the question about the actual probability of South Africa or parts of the country being plunged into total darkness. And, in preparing for this, the question of what happened in Texas in February came to mind, where due to winter storms, they actually were plunged into darkness for several days. And, as I looked at that, I thought, I want to ask you, because if this could happen in a state like Texas, in a first world country, then, it makes one shudder at the prospects of what could happen here, given the problems that Eskom has been experiencing. But having said that, I also thought, I don't want to give Sikonathi a kind of a way out by him saying, you see, if it can happen in Texas, it could happen here. So that having, being stated as an example, what are the probabilities of that happening here, and how widespread could it be?
What we will have at the most serious of instances, Sakina, should any technical glitches come as a result, we will have some glitches on online vending where people might be disrupted, or their ability to pay for electricity online might be disrupted. We may have a few issues where we are not exactly able to use the software to plan for planned maintenance. Nothing in the scale that you have mentioned. We have taken the measures to do to avoid that. And as I have said earlier to you, Oracle as teams complement what Eskom has internally. So they do not provide a service that is not provided by anyone else. And I must add that Eskom has also entered into an urgent procurement process to find the technical ability or experts, now that we cannot absolutely rely on Oracle to meet its obligations under the contract. There will be no damage to the scale that you have mentioned. Yes, there might indeed be some disturbances in the event that we might have a breakdown here and there.
So, Mpumelelo, listening to that as a chairman of an investment company, how do you feel when you hear this, when you see a story like this come up? What does it signal to you?
Well, what Mr. Mantshantsha just said now is actually soothing, in a sense that he seems to suggest that Eskom has got some mitigating measures, or its arrangement with Oracle is of such a nature that should they go ahead with the pullout, Eskom will be able to manage and not plunge the country into total darkness. So from that perspective, it sounds like they've got their ducks in the row. However, what Mantshantsha is saying is not what the Eskom chief IT advisor has said in court papers, where he suggests that should Oracle go ahead and execute its threat against Eskom, the country will be plunged into total darkness, and he talks about countless members of the public that will be affected. And he speaks about how the economy, already overstrained by COVID, would be hammered even further. So I really wonder whether in that presentation, perhaps the chief IT advisor had in mind what Mr. Mantshantsha is saying now. But you see, for companies and members of the public in general who really have to depend on what we're dealing with here, which is a state monopoly in terms of Eskom, we don't have any other alternative, by and large, in South Africa for electricity supply. So Eskom is an indispensable national asset. So it's important that in the way it procures services from whoever, it does so keeping in mind that if something happens to them as Eskom, the whole country is inevitably affected. So I got worried when I read this story because I was thinking, what kind of a service provider has got such a hold on Eskom that it could threaten the whole country with total darkness, obviously to extract whatever they want to extract from Eskom. And what kind of a service provider is this who's prepared to put the gun in the head of Eskom executives and say, you either pay me the way what I want or I pull out, knowing very well that should they pull out, it would have catastrophic implications for the economy and for the people of the country. So that is worrying, Sakina. It's reminiscent of those days when we had this situation with Net1, when Net1 was providing services for social grants, and we were told that should Net1 pull out, millions of South Africans would not receive their state support in terms of social grants. So I think this type of arrangements should be avoided. If I were Eskom now, I would begin a process of auditing all those contracts that I have as a utility that might compromise the whole country should any of those service providers pull out or threaten to pull out.
Now, Mpumelelo, as I said, in as much as we are looking at the Oracle debacle, which is in the public domain at the moment, what other factors or sort of contracts do you believe could actually contribute to us finding ourselves in darkness in South Africa?
Well, Eskom is a multi-billion rand procurer of services, one of the big companies in South Africa that procures a whole range of services, from IT services, as we've just spoken now about Oracle, to many other services. But the biggest cost driver at Eskom at the moment, and it has always been the case, is coal contracts, because South Africa relies heavily on coal. About 90% of our energy supply comes from coal. So Eskom's procurement of coal becomes critical. So they have to make sure that what is essentially a cost driver and what is essentially a primary energy component, which is coal, the cost thereof is driven down as much as possible, so that down the line, South Africans are able to procure energy at reliable and cheap prices. So if I were Eskom, those are some of the things that I would try and do to see if I am not contracted to people who might, if they were to have problems in their own companies, either the company collapses because of bankruptcy or because maybe there's a contractual dispute, as it is the case in terms of Oracle. Should that happen, none of these service providers have such a hold on Eskom to the point that it will lead to load shedding or a complete blackout in the country. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. I think that there's a lot of these suppliers that are really having a stranglehold on Eskom. Some of them, they may well be supplying over 55% of Eskom's coal needs in a very short time, and that's high risk for the country.
And Dr. Montisetse, let me bring you in because speaking of cost drivers at Eskom, labor would be one of those ranking quite highly. So what's your take on what's happening with Eskom at the moment? And also in terms of labor, because we're coming up to that season again when it's time to negotiate or not negotiate, depending on what actually happens in the end. But what's your take on what's happening and what is labor's input here?
Thank you very much, Shagina, and the gentlemen that are part of the discussion. We just want to remind the nation that as the National Union of Mine Workers, we have been questioning the credibility of the executives of Eskom long before even this CEO was appointed, because of the reckless kind of expenditure that Eskom has engaged in, which has led to more than 400 billion debt that Eskom has. And I can hear that Mr. Mantshantsha now, when you ask him about this deal, he said it is not about payment, but he repeated to say that Oriental claimed that they owe them more than 7 billion. He is repeating what you are saying. So you can see here that the issue here is about the debt again by Eskom. This is very dangerous. I think the brother that have said that the monopoly of service providers within Eskom is a major problem. We are now facing a problem here whereby Eskom has made a deal with South32 because it is bought by Seriti, a lot of shenanigans, and there's a 68 billion in that deal which Eskom is obliged to finance for the whole 14 years. And in this deal, they deviate from competition, meaning that the deal was not put through the procurement processes, whereby companies should come and present themselves, and the best company will be chosen. South32 has been given monopoly of this, and they asked the Treasury to accept this, and the Treasury has rejected this thing, and they go through it anyway. When the Treasury has rejected it, it is another monopoly of South32 on the control of supply of coal to Eskom. Tomorrow, when South32 has a major problem of operational processes, can't supply needed coal, the country will be plunged in darkness again. These things that Eskom is doing, it's really a major problem. We think that there's a secret thing to collapse Eskom as an entity for government. Because another thing is the issue of IPPs. On top of this deal that we are speaking about of 68 billion, which the CEO has signed it anyway, we have been calling for this. We have this man called Soli, who was the chief of procurement. He has been expelled because he was raising these things. Now he's been suspended. Now the CEO is being investigated. It is not suspended. He's still the CEO there. Then why the other one will be suspended when the other one is investigated, is not suspended? And the man who had actually signed the deal, which is going to put even more stress of debt on top of Eskom. So we have been speaking about IPPs, that how can you buy from these IPPs which are hiding to the nation? We don't know who are these people that are eating from this fiscus of Eskom. The unit of energy has been bought by a large amount, and Eskom, when it sells a unit of energy that is bought large amount to the nation and to the companies and so on, it is less than what they buy from the IPPs. This is a clear intention of collapsing Eskom, and we are calling upon the nation to rise to say that enough, it is enough. I think we have been calling for Eskom executives to be fired, all of them. But at this point in time, I think if Orentia is going to suspend its services and plunge the country into darkness, that's when people will understand that Eskom credibility is questionable. There's a lot of corruption that is taking place there. There's a man there called Oza, who have been suspected of engaging in corruption. Eskom issued an investigation within Eskom, and they declared him to be clean. But others, when they are suspected of any wrongdoing, especially Africans, they have been suspended. So we calling for Eskom to be suspended also, so that when the investigation comes, and we are calling for investigation outside Eskom. You can't, when Eskom has caused a mess itself within, then they establish an investigation against their own CEO.
Mr. Montisetse, talking about
yes,
those factors that would plunge Eskom into darkness, and I hear you talking about the monopolies, I hear you talk about how Eskom is going about managing its finances, lots of investigations internally at the organization as well. But in terms of labor and labor's demands on Eskom, you talk about Oracle withdrawing its services. Is there a possibility that if Labour does not like what comes out at the negotiation table, they would also pose a similar threat of plunging South Africa into darkness by, as you say, you're calling on South Africans, calling on your members to perhaps withdraw services from Eskom that could potentially plunge us into darkness?
It must be very clear that when the company misused
Okay. My apologies, Mr. Montisetse, we need to fix your sound there. But while we do that, let's just bring Sikonathi back in. So you've heard there what the other gentlemen feel some of the factors are that Eskom needs to contend with. Expenditure, Sikonathi, when we look at what's happening at the moment, even right now, as soon as it rains, the lights go out. Power stations exploding all over the show. So in terms of how Eskom is using its money, how much are you spending on maintenance at the moment in trying to just keep this very fragile grid intact? And how does that impact on future infrastructure spend where you can actually go on to new infrastructure?
Thank you, Sabina. Let me just take a step back to address some of the questions Mpumelelo raised earlier. Eskom currently has anything up to 15,000 contracts running, all of them working together to help produce electricity. So the Oracle contract is only one of those. And as I did say, there is backup for each and every one of them, others more critical than others indeed. In terms of power stations, Sakina, we have said here that on average, Eskom's power stations are more than 40 years old, and they have had quite a hard life where they had to be run very hard above the norm for coal power stations like that. So we are having to spend quite a significant amount of money and time on maintenance to indeed catch up with the maintenance that should have always been done, and to make sure that the stations are able to deliver acceptable levels of performance. We have at this point increased available energy capacity in preparation for winter to currently about 31,000 megawatts. By the time the winter hits, there will be 34,000 megawatts available in the system. 3 months ago, we were less than 30,000 megawatts of capacity that could be relied on any day. So we have started returning the machines back to service in order to help generate electricity. We are going to keep up with this reliability maintenance, which of course has cost a lot of money. And this we need in order to do what we can, the lights on. I hope that answers your question.
Well, in a way, but, you know, we are out of time. I promised all of you we'd be out of here by 7. So we have to start rounding it up. So let me just quickly go back to Mpumelelo and to Mr. Montisetse, just as your final remarks, and then, you know, if Sikonathi has sufficiently addressed your concerns or not. And again, in terms of what needs to happen, whether we are getting value for money out of what Eskom is doing, and how you think Eskom could perhaps better manage the situation so that we are not plunged into darkness. Mpumelelo?
Well, Sikonathi's words are really reassuring here, because he's telling South Africans that we shouldn't really get worried, because for every contract that Eskom has signed, it's got a backup mechanism should things not work. And I hope that this is a sign that things have been improving, because in the past, and I'm not talking about not long ago, there was a situation, for example, with regard to coal contracts where Eskom did not procure coal until the last hour, and suddenly there was emergency procurement. And you know what that did in the immediate past financial year? It pushed the coal inflation by 14.1%, which was 3 times the average CPI inflation of the country in general. So, and that actually led to an investigation by Minister Mantshantsha, Minister Patel, and Minister Godan in terms of saying, how do we get all these suppliers to Eskom to cut down their cost? How can we have so much exorbitant? And the reason why that was the case, Sakina, once again, is that the drivers of that 14.1% inflation were a few suppliers. So the issue of contracting, really, Eskom needs to improve. If they can nail down procurement and cut the cost around procurement and procure efficiently, more than half of Eskom's problems will disappear. But however, it's not going to happen soon, Sakina, as we wrap up. It's not going to happen soon. That's why at the moment the CEO is under investigation. The chief procurement officer at Eskom has been suspended. Why? Because there's a fight over contracts. There was a board member, Mr. Tabengwa, a new board member for that matter, who resigned shortly after a dispute in the board about the contract that had to do with oil, fuel supply. So the issue of contracts has to be worked out. If I were Eskom, I would start from saying, what would be the most competitive units of electricity in terms of price that I want to give the economy, that I want to give South Africans, and then work backwards in terms of what I procure. Everything that I procure must help me fulfill that obligation to supply electricity at that unit price. That's good for the economy. That's good for all households in South Africa.
Mpumelelo, thanks. We're out of time, and isn't that common sense though? But Mr. Montisetse, briefly, your parting shot for us on this one.
Let me just say that, Eskom,
I apologize. We really have a problem with your sound there, to the point that it's so distorted that we really cannot hear you. So I do apologize, but hopefully we'll have opportunity to speak again. Sikonathi, once more, as Mpumelelo was saying, some common sense things in terms of Eskom and its expenditure and what needs to be done. Why isn't it being done? Why isn't Eskom paying the least amount that it should for services such as procurement of coal, etc.?
Mkhabela just nailed it in the end, and he said there is a fight about contracts. The reason Ntate Montisetse even at this very point says that whole management team should be fired is exactly because they are doing their job. They are performing the job for which they have been hired. The duty of a chief executive and any executive employed at Eskom is to manage and make sure that they bring the best interests of the company forward. And that is the case here. The issue of the suspension of the chief procurement officer is exactly management doing their job, looking into procurement and saying, but we are having serious problems here. There are performance issues. And Mr. Chitangano will get his opportunity in a disciplinary process, which is an attempt to rein in the runaway spending that Dr. Mkhabela has just raised. Eskom's management is doing the job that it has been hired to do, and there is huge resistance coming as a start, indeed, from Labour, which says all of these people must be fired.
We're going to have to park it there. We have to park it there for today. But I thank you, gentlemen, because you've given me ideas for further discussions, like, for example, the price of coal. Are you paying top dollar, or are you paying too little for the coal? I suspect it's the former. And also about those IPPs, I think we need to have a discussion about that. But thank you so much to you gentlemen for that discussion this morning. Sikonathi Mantshantsha is, of course, Eskom spokesperson, president of NUM, Joseph Montisetse, and the chairman of Resources and Investment Company, Menar, Mpumelelo Mkhabela. That takes us to News Time with Leanne as we continue with the rest of the stories.